All right. Well, good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. We're happy to see you guys today. Tuesday, as you know, is our special day for codes and standards. And today we have a special guest joining us from across the pond, kind of, sort of. Anyway, questions, if you have any burning questions, you can ask them, but our guest this evening has quite a lot of content to cover, so we ask if it can wait till the end. We'll cover as many questions as we can at the end of her presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to DJ, my colleague, and she will introduce our guest for today.
I have a little bit of a lag here, so if I freeze, let me know, okay? But I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Miss Karen Vinsani. She is going to be speaking about her journey in promoting tiny houses in her country of Italy, with the goal of bringing it international. It's very lofty, very awesome. Her background is in international law, and she's attempting to bridge the gap between the current housing and the robust codes and standards that can be applied to tiny living alternatives. She wants to bring her work in this body of knowledge to all levels of governance, to see if she can permit an open door, no pun intended, to helping people secure safe and affordable housing, not only in her country, but as she said, around the world. So I guess without further ado, here's the powerhouse herself, Miss Vinsani.
Okay, 1 second, excuse me.
And she's gone.
Okay, no, I'm here, excuse me, because there is a sound that I have to stop, otherwise I can't hear you. Okay.
Absolutely.
I really thank you for this presentation, Darla, and nice to meet you on the video, and to all the audience. I'm really excited for this opportunity, as I would like it could be useful to share some ideas and experiences that I have developed during this time for all the international community of tiny housers. So really thank you to Noah for these talks, because I think that is very important to share ideas and experience. As I said at the beginning, during the break of this presentation, I would like to introduce myself only for a short, because I would like to go directly to the point that I would like to discuss with all of you. More or less 5 years ago, I started to be interested in the tiny house movement, because I was involved, I was working, and I gave life to a no-profit organization involved in the construction of micro spaces and modular standard for the exhibition industry, and in connection with people with social problems or disabled. So at the beginning of my experience, I said, why I can't we can't connect the exhibition industry with micro spaces, and then go forward and starting to discuss the possibility to build tiny houses. And we have an opportunity during the pandemic, because the exhibition sector stopped completely. And so all engineers, architects, plumbers, electricians, all people had time to further develop this issue. Because in Italy, as I said, is at the early stage. We don't have a big market as in the USA. And so we start from this point. And we said that the first problem is not the involvement of companies or stakeholders, because we have a lot of artisans and people of companies of the exhibition sectors that are really interested to enter this business. But the first problem are legal barriers. So for us, the main problem is this one, because we have, really we have a lot of people that are able to build through the Made in Italy that is very well known all over the world. And so we said, in which way we can start discuss this new opportunity, market opportunity for us, and also involving people in and training people in this sector. So we have started from the legal part, and this is the reason why I have decided to enroll again at university to the Department of Law, because I would like to have the support of the academic to promote a common legal framework for tiny houses. And after 2 years, I'm working with our Department of Law. They are interested in this opportunity, and I think it could be useful for the community, because it is useful to promote a national law in our country, but using international standards, because as I said, in Italy we are really at the early stage, so we don't have common building codes and standards. So for us it's very important to have to work not only from the stakeholder of the building sector, but also work with the academics, the community, and the municipalities and the regions is the central point in our country, because there is not really a sensitivity on tiny houses. Is something very, very important for us to receive a common endorsement for the community of tiny houses that is bigger and bigger in Italy, but in reality is not legalized. So we need a strong international cooperation.
Well, let me jump in here, Karen. Let me interrupt you for just a second. Is that a tiny house that you're in right now?
What?
Are you in a tiny house right now?
Right now, I am in a not legalized tiny house. Is a self-made construction that we have made with recycled materials from exhibitions.
Okay, so
you're the backyard of a normal apartment in reality.
So
yeah.
you built it. So the house you're in, you built yourself. Did you get approval to live in that tiny house?
No, because as it is in the backyard of a normal house, in reality, you don't need it. You don't need it. You can
it's
use
in that gray area. We call that the gray area. Well, you have
the gray area.
You have quite a few slides to go through. So could we go ahead and get started with your slideshow, and
absolutely.
we can move through that quickly. And like
I'll go quickly through my
like Leanne said, that
I shared the screen.
If you have any questions, make sure you either put them in the chat, and we'll get those at the end. And I'm going to try to move her pretty quickly through these 25 slides that she has. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Okay, I go ahead. Yeah. So I want to show the legal barriers and the international law. What is important today for my presentation, I would like to say that the right to housing in a sustainable housing, such as a tiny house, has a supranational connotation. What does it mean? That is something not related to national government, but is related to something very important, that are human rights. Because to have a housing, it means to have an adequate housing in international law. And it's a broader concept that is related to the concept of human dignity. I think it's important this point, because the problem in, I think, to the legalization of tiny house is that there are no binding rules for tiny houses, whilst human rights are binding for all the states that have complied with the international agreement. So the majority of countries are part of the United Nations, for example. And so there are different declarations of under the United Nations on human rights that express that everyone has the right of an adequate standard of living. Here there are some examples of the Convention on the Right of the Child and also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that are universal recognized. Why are so important? Even if they are not binding, as they are a soft law, they made in the laws the right to adequate housing is the central point. What does it mean? That even if they are not binding, they are recognized internationally. So, right to adequate housing is a broader concept. It's not only to say, I want a shelter, it's the right to housing to have a shelter, but it's something more important. It means that you can realize your dignity as human rights if you have an adequate housing. And also, it means that you can be integrated in the society. So it's related to two important human rights, human dignity and non-discrimination. There are other important statements of the international community, in particular from the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that stated that inadequate housing should be taken into account 7 elements: legal security of tenure, availability of services, materials, facilities and infrastructure, affordability, habitability, accessibility, location, and cultural adequacy. I think that we have to be reminded in all our discussions when we are working for international standards for tiny houses, that there is an international definition under the United Nations that said that each state should be taken into account these 7 elements. So we have to think about, we are working for common global standard. They are accomplished with these 7 elements. Because if we want an international recognition, is vital.
So let me ask, legal security of tenure. What does that mean? Does that mean that you own the house that you're living in? What is legal security of a tenure? I don't understand what that is.
Be legal security. It means that you must live in your house in a permanent way, and you can't be evicted, for example.
Okay, so it gives you the rights of ownership. And I understand the availability of services, and that would be like water, sewer, garbage pickup, that kind of thing. You have your materials. Facilities would be something like the fire department, the police department.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Exactly.
And then infrastructure. I guess that would be utilities, utility hookups. And then this is important: affordability, habitability, accessibility, location, and cultural adequacy. Those are interesting items for that tiny houses could certainly fill the bill for affordability, habitability, accessibility. And since they are on wheels, they could be moved around. And so the location could move. And then cultural adequacy means, depending upon the culture, I mean, right now in the United States, we have huge houses. And I think in different cultures, they're used to different size houses. Certainly in the US, we seem to have this mind that the bigger keep up with the Joneses and make a big house and that kind of thing. So I kind of understand those 7. So I just wanted to clarify those.
Yeah, cultural adequacy, it means that we need for adequate housing and acceptance of from a cultural point of view, because, for example, if you think about tiny house right now, there is sometimes a misconception in the community. At the beginning, when I tried to explain what is a tiny house community, a lot of people said, but they are only for travelers, for example. So there is really a misconception. So they must be culturally accepted in the local community is very important, and also the location, because if they are culturally accepted, they should be easily reached from your job place, or if you want to reach, for example, trains, airport, then should be a community not isolated. So this is another important thing. Is if we receive an open door from a municipality, they should adequate this kind of housing to the traditional ones in this cultural sense. And another important thing that is internationally affirmed is the right to housing should be seen as the right to live somewhere. This is important. Somewhere in security, peace, and dignity. To live somewhere, it means that there is not at the beginning that you said you have only to live, for example, in a traditional building. You can live somewhere, and it's strictly connected to the meaning of residence. Because in reality, if you, as you are a human being, you have a residence because you are living in the world. So you can live somewhere. So it's not true when they said, oh, you can build your tiny house in this location. It's not true, because the international law said you have the right to live somewhere. And I think it's a very important point that we have to take into account when we receive a negative answer from local municipalities, for example, because it's something that is internationally recognized. And here again,
we here in the United States, and probably the same thing in Italy, the housing prices are astronomical, and when they get so high, then you cannot own a house and live somewhere. It takes that affordability element out of it. So we call it attainable housing. Houses, you can live somewhere, but they're not attainable for the vast majority of income levels that are in the US and around the world too.
Oh yeah, in Italy, Italy and Greece, I think have the lowest wages in Europe. So here, the affordability of houses is a very social problem in our country.
And if I can interject, one of the things that my background psychology, and one of the things I've noticed is that people who rent have a less healthy lifestyle than people who own. It doesn't matter how big or how small. And when you own, you're putting more back into your communities, because you need more things for your own place than you would need if you rented a place. And that brings every community up to a better like a fiscal level, a better community sense of community. So it's actually a healthier thing to have a tiny house than have even a nice big apartment, because it does more for you and the community.
Yeah, I think that it is not very easy to answer to this objection, but I think that another important is not a human right, but I think is strictly connected with human dignity, is the own property. So each state should make efforts to help people to have its own property and not to live in a rented house. Otherwise, there will be always a difference between the owner and the people that are only rented something, and they use their money for the richest one. This is, I think, one of the main problems. But I think that there is a closed mind because of bigger interest that we have in all our society. This is the reason, because when, and I will speak later, when you say the United Nations said we can live somewhere in security, in reality, there are, for example, in Italy, we have a lot of migrants from Africa that live on the streets, but they have received residence in the municipality. In which way? Is not an adequate housing. So I think it's a political problem, this one. Yeah, so why I can have a residence in a tiny house and on the street I can. So I think it is a
good point, very good point. In other words, you can live on the streets and have a residence. You can be recognized as having a residence but you can't in a tiny house. Good point.
Yeah.
What else you got there?
So here, adequate housing, there is another meaning coming from the Commission on Human Settlement and the Global Strategy for Shelter. And here we have, again, to take into account what does adequate means, because it is connected with the previous slide. So privacy, space, security, lighting, ventilation, basic infrastructure, and adequate location at a reasonable cost. So I think that a tiny house accomplishes all this kind of minimum requirement for an adequate housing. But as we are in the Commission for Standards, we are working on this point. We know that, for example, lighting or ventilation are important points, and also security. For example, for the problem of insurances in our country, we are experiencing a lot of problem in this sense. And so I think that adequate security is another point that we have to deepen and find a common, clear, but minimum standard that can secure everyone that decides to live in a tiny house. So we have just explained adequate housing meaning, the concept. So as I said, it's not only is not derived only from the international law, but it's something that is determined by social, economic, cultural, political, climatic, and also ecological factors. In Europe, we have a sensitiveness under the climate change. For example, here in Rimini, as I said to Darla, there are 27 degrees and we are in November, so it's not normal. And so, for example, tiny house can be a solution to this problem, because we have a lot of people coming from Africa to the south of Europe because of climate change, for example. So where we can put all this person is a problem. So adequacy also for them. And also, as I said, they have to be strictly connected with other human rights. Target groups, I put this on because I think it's important. If we want to think about a global recognition of tiny houses, we have to think about the target groups. So we would like to build tiny houses. In reality, they can be also a business. But we have to think that, first of all, we have, for the international community, think about the problem of inadequately housed or people that live in really bad social conditions. Otherwise, I think it could be difficult for the richest ones said, we want an adequate housing in a tiny house. So the tiny house, primarily to have an international legal recognition, should be a solution for affordable housing for these target groups that are not only people with social bad social condition, but also, as I said, millennials, single parent, gig workers, because for example, if I go to make a proposal to a local municipality and I said, I would like to build a tiny house village for tourism. They said, it's denied, you can't, because it's a business. But if I said, I would like to build a tiny house village for single parents, and in my city, there are a lot of single mothers, for example, and they said, okay, we can make a rule for these target groups. I think it would be possible. Whilst if you said, it's only for tourism purposes or for business, I think I can receive an open door. So we have to work, or we have to think about the target group. When we said we want an international recognition, it could be for, as I said before, for climate change in some areas of the US, I don't know. But for example, generally speaking, as far as human dignity is concerned, I think that first of all, we have to think about social vulnerable groups. In this way, we can help local government to tackle some problems. And one of the most important is housing affordability.
Are you saying that introducing the potential for tiny house alternatives in Italy, you're going to be more successful if you show need and how it makes sense to introduce it? Or is this just going to be like kind of your approach to tiny homes in general?
No, it's not an approach, a personal approach, but we have tried through an agri-camping, because there was a norm here, that you can build an agri-camps, and we built, not me, but one of the person of our informal groups, and have built 10 tiny houses for agri-camping in the summer, so in the farmlands for tourism purposes. And unfortunately, now is under process. It's about 4 years, because they said you want to make a business without building permissions. And
yeah, I think what she's saying is that at least in Italy, they don't want you to create things that would be for business purposes if you're going to rent them out on Airbnb or tourism or something like that. But if you go to the local jurisdiction, we call it the authority having jurisdiction here in the US. If you go to the authority having jurisdiction and you tell them you're going to be creating housing for students, seasonal workers, millennials, single parents. I don't know what a gig worker is, but a young couple or a low income group, those are groups that are not adequately served. And so the jurisdiction would be more interested in giving permission for these groups. But we still have to get to what is a tiny house and what are the standards and codes for tiny houses before we can even talk about where we can put them and the zoning and all of that too. We have I just had a meeting here with Colorado, and once they get the definition and the standards and codes completed there by July, it's going to make the door a little more open for the zoning to say, okay, now that this is how you build one and this is what it is, then this is where you can place that home.
Yeah. I agree with you, absolutely. But I think that here we have a different sensitiveness. I really don't know the reason why, but we went into the local judge to speak with him and asking why, because they come 2 times and they said, you have to show that you can move it, these tiny houses in the agri camps, and it's true, because it's possible, but it's very difficult, because in reality they are for not a permanent, but more or less for a semi-permanent location. And they said It's not true, because it's true that you can move them, but in reality they are permanent. So for them, there is a huge debate. There was a huge debate with the process, and is a second appeal, but they said it's not allowed. So we think that we can't receive a positive answer from the actual jurisdiction, because there is an orientation in this sense. But we have an experience in Rimini with both tiny houses on the sea. We have 6 tiny houses on boats, so they are new one. And at the beginning, they don't receive any permits, but under the law of the sea, we have received a permission.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
something strange, it's something only for seasonal, for the season period, 6 months, during from May to October, more or less.
Yeah,
But
we
after,
do that here too. The same thing with boats. Anytime it's governed by the Coast Guard, and so that's a different authority having jurisdiction. But yeah, no, we struggle with those same things. The difference, I think, in the U.S. than in Italy is we have a large number of tiny housers, a large number of interested people in tiny house, and we've been in this movement for quite a while. So be encouraged that if you can rally your support, that the judges and the people that make the laws, they will hopefully in your country bow to the desires and wishes of their local people, the people that are in the area. So anyway, we got to move along here. We've got about 10 more minutes where we can. I wanted to get to the ASTM thing here.
Yeah. So only to finish this part, I want to say that we have to take into account that human rights are binding for the states that comply with some international convention, whilst, as I said, all the recommendations are not binding. So we have to find minimum global building standard for adequate housing. And I think only in this way we can go to the international, to ask to the international community, in particular to the United Nations, to ask for a global recognition. And so I think it's important, because in this way states are obliged to use and also to respect this international obligation. I wrote down here that the global building standard developed with the ASTM Tiny House Standard Committee should represent the turning point for the proposal of a global legal framework for adequate housing, because it is an international recognition of standards. So they can say they are not internationally recognized. I think really it's the turning point, because you need before the standards, and after you can write a global law, a global framework. Is not a law. Each state should write his own law, but you have a global framework. So I think it's very, very important to have these standards.
The challenges on these, challenge that we have now is we have, site-built homes or regular homes. We have modular homes. We have manufactured housing or mobile homes. And we have RVs that are not supposed to be lived in full time. And this is, when you were talking about filling the gap, that's where the problem lies. These are what I call a hybrid between movability. They're not easily moved, but they can be moved. And they are used for permanent housing, for dwellings, and to be lived in legally. And so what we're looking at, and what Colorado is the first state to look at it as a state level, is creating another category, which is tiny houses on wheels. And the American Standard Testing Method, ASTM subcommittee has voted to authorize a subcommittee on tiny houses on wheels. And so that is what I think Karen's talking about here, is that because we do have this ASTM subcommittee, and anyone across the nation can give input into the writing of these codes and standards, that once these codes and standards are written, if they're written in a way that they can be accepted globally, then then the local jurisdictions, the authority having jurisdiction, have something to point to and say, okay, if it's built to this standard, then we will let you live in it full time as a dwelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in Italy, for example, containers, yurts, or something like that are not allowed. So you need a building authorization, because they said they are permanent. So for us, but also in Europe, because I have linked with other European countries, is the same. Only tiny house on wheels for permanent living is the solution. In fact, I have received the first authorization only for one tiny house for a permanent living, because otherwise they are recreational vehicles and you can use them also.
Tell us about that.
Can...
Tell us about that, Karen. You said you had one house that you have gotten legal. Tell us about how that happened.
Yeah, it happened because during the pandemic, with a lot of architects, engineers, we have a lot of time, and we said, why we have to try to build a tiny house, an example of tiny house. And we have used recycled materials coming from exhibitions and other things that we have used, the new one. And we said, in which way we can do it? We use the backyard, because here is a building site. So there are no problems. It's not a farmland. But the problem is that you have to move it every 6 months. So every 6 months, we have to move only of 1 meter, for example. We move it because the police department in our municipality use drones to see if you have moved your tiny house. And so we have to move for 1 meter, and we said, it's moved. And they said, okay, it's moved. And they can't say anything.
So let me clarify there. So you built a tiny house, and did you say that you can live in it legally, but
No.
because you can't live in it legally full time, and because of that you have to
the residence inside.
It can't be a resident, so it's temporary. We call it temporary seasonal housing, but you move it 1 meter and you can live in it for another 6 months.
Exactly. So
okay.
I can say, yeah, all area around is the gray area of tiny houses. I have spoken with another guy with the same problem, and he said that in another municipality I do in the same way, and I tried in the same way. Otherwise, is not allowed. It's strange. This thing is really strange. But now we have a new decree, because we have a shift in the government right now, so that if you have a social purpose or a green purpose, you can reuse some areas that can be farmland or building plots for social or green purposes. And so we want, you can stay there up to 2 years. So we would like to use this new norm that in reality derive from the tourism legislation. The name is the Decreto Semplificazioni, Simplification Decree, to ask to build the first tiny house village. It will be hard, but we try for a social purpose. In
So
reality,
your
it's also-
goal is to build a tiny house village, not just one tiny house.
yeah, to create a community, yeah, because we have members that are interested in is like a co-housing village for us. Another thing important in Europe, we have another problem, but I can skip this part because in reality there is no at European level. There is the European community has not a specific legislation on building and housing. So in reality, each member state must organize its own legislation in this way. There isn't a common legal framework at the European level, and it's a problem because if we want to find a European law, we have to think about this with other tiny house members. In reality, there is no a competence of the European Union. So is another problem because each state needed to propose its own law to its national member state, national government. So it's another crazy aspect of the legislation. We are a European Union, but in reality we are single member states.
So basically you have, you know, Italy and France and all of the countries, we call them countries there, that are part of the EU, the European Union. But then you also have your local regions, and then the laws that for housing anyway is not on a in Europe, and it's not anything in the entire Europe area. It's broken down to each individual local government. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It is exactly what I would like to explain. Yes, there is not a European jurisdiction on housing. So
got it.
We have every single state need. And the second important point is the link between inadequate housing and other rights. The problem of residence, as I said before, is, for example, in our country is very important because if you want to develop this kind of market and if you want to sell tiny houses, for example, for a permanent living, another problem is that you can't receive residence in a tiny house. But it's very important, the concept of residence in Italy. We have two different concepts, residence and domicile. I don't know if it's the same in the US.
So a residence and a domicile. Okay.
Okay, yes. Residence is the place where the person has his habitual abode. Domicile, the place where a person has established the principal center of his affairs and business. So your company.
And they could be the same, the residence and a domicile could be the same.
No, yeah, they are different.
Two different things.
Yeah, so residence, why is important? Because only if you have your residence, you can have access to health, for example, that is public in our country. It's not like in the US, and to all social benefits. Otherwise, you are completely excluded from the society. So it's necessary to have your residence. But I have found a solution. And I went to my municipality and they said, you can, in reality, I can receive also here, I can't receive potentially my residence. Why? I explain. There is a circular from the Ministry of the Interior that is related to the human right for the refugees. In Italy, we have a lot of refugees from Africa, that said the type of accommodation cannot constitute an obstacle to registering with the register office. It doesn't matter if housing is a proper house or an improper accommodation, such as a trailer. The key element is the existence of an accommodation that can be of any kind.
So you can get a residence in something that's not necessarily recognized as a legal domicile. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, so I went there to my municipality and I asked, because generally is used for homelessness, for the homelessness, they receive, for example, residents in the municipality in a street that doesn't exist. For example, Street of the Stars, for example. And you receive everything there, but you are a resident.
Interesting.
And it's related to the human dignity. As you are a human being, you need a residence. If you are
So
an homeless,
dignity, so dignity is the basis of slipping a tiny home as helping. I get what you're saying. It's the step towards getting the recognition of a tiny home, correct?
Exactly. To be a resident, permanent resident in a tiny house is the only way. But in generally, if you go to the municipality, they don't say to you this. They'll say, you don't have the residence, you have to rent an apartment and then you can receive residence. But I went there.
Isn't it amazing what the government doesn't tell us? The things we need
No,
to
absolutely, absolutely. And this, no, absolutely. I really, I travel all different municipalities, 8, 10 all year round. And then I call to Rome, to the UN Refugees Council. There is an office in Rome where I studied diplomacy, and I have spoken with a director. I don't know who he was, and he said, yes, there is this circular that you said, and he explained, go to your municipality and explain that you can receive accommodation because of this. I went there again and they said, yeah, you can receive your residence. In reality, now I should go to my municipality and they say, I would like here my residence.
We have very little time left. I don't want to step on our wonderful Leanne's toes. She's the moderator, but if there's any last point, I think we should make it or we'll miss questions.
Yeah. No, I think that this was the second key element, very important, because, for example, also with the builders, they said, but it's possible to have residency in a tiny house, because how can I sell them if you can receive a residence, because you can settle down with your family, for example. And now we have the proof that we can receive residence inside. So I'm sure, because now I'm working for the financial department of a local municipality, where I would like to build the first village, if I hope to do this. And our register office said, yes, there are no problems. There is this circular that exists, because I'm working for the PNRR, is the European Program for Resistance and Resilience, that is a recovery fund after pandemic from the European Union. And then we would like to use some of these European funds also for this new kind of settlement, because we think that there will be an open door using these funds for this kind of communities. But the problem is that there is no knowledge in our country. Is the very, very big problem. There is no knowledge in which we use these funds. It is a very big problem.
It's difficult because you don't have codes and standards enforced. You found a way to slip it under the radar, but yet if you did have the codes and standards you do have don't apply, so you're really caught.
Yeah. In fact, in reality, we have spoken with the local builders that they give us also farmland for this idea and to use the European funds, but they said, we want to be sure, so we need standards. So
yeah,
I'm waiting the standards of the International Committee, because when there will be, we can start with this pilot project in our region. It is a pilot project, but it could be the possibility within 2 years to have a regional law for tiny houses, because we should be the first region in our country. So I hope, I really hope so. I'm a little bit crazy sometimes, but I think that is necessary vision to the future. Otherwise, you stop, and so it's important. And the last consideration is that when we think about a global legislative framework, we have to consider also for the subcommittee of tiny house on wheels for permanent residency that residence is a right in movement. In generally, both in civil law and common law, because we have to take into account that we have 2 different jurisdictions, civil law and common law. So Italy is in some way, UK, for example, completely different from us. But the first important thing to take into account is that is not like at the beginning, that you have to settle in a place and you have your residence. But now there is a change in the conception of residence that is in movement. But in our code, civil code, for example, it is considered something permanent. So we have to change the legislation. So I think that it would be necessary in the future also a national law that said that you can have your residence also not permanent. For example, when you open a temporary shop, it's the same. It's not a permanent shop, it's a temporary shop. So we have to change this, but this is possible for business, but not for people right now in the legislation.
So in other words, if you have a movable tiny home or a tiny house on wheels, the problem is it can be moved and it's not permanent, so it's not a permanent residence. Although if the whole movement is based on the fact that they are on wheels and they can be moved and you can take your house with you when you go to another location. And so that's a different concept, not only in national law in the US, but also international law. They don't understand the possibility of taking your house and moving it to another location.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you can save money if you can move your house, and I think it's very important. I think it's one of the most interesting part of living in a tiny house, because, for example, in Europe we have the European citizenship. So for example, now I'm working from Rimini, Italy, but in reality I can work also from Austria, from France, because a lot of our work now is from smart working. So we don't need to stay in the same place all the year round. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is important. We have to change the conception of the legislator.
Right,
because it starts from the tradition of civil law and common law. So it will be a very big challenge, this one. But if we have an international legal framework, I think it could be possible, because we can affirm that the right to housing could be, and to reside could be a right in movement.
Because I got you. I think I understand. I think I understand what you're trying to say. So with that, do you have a kind of a wrap up? Can you maybe wrap us up with slide number 25 there or something, and then we can turn it over to questions and to Leanne.
Yeah, I have understand. I have explained more or less, but I think it's clear that up to now, unfortunately, the judgment of the Italian Supreme Court established that your residence must be an habitual abode in a specific location.
Yeah, I think we covered that when I was looking at slide 25 to see if that, maybe my slides aren't the same as yours.
I don't know where.
Says future perspectives.
Okay. Okay. Okay, no. Okay, future legal matters. This one.
That one and the one below it.
What? Future practice. Okay. As I said, remove legal barriers for tiny homes. In which way we can tackle this problem? Because it's a global problem that we have in all our tiny house communities. We need global standards because we have to link the adequate housing to the concept of human dignity. And so adequate housing need global standards. If the committee will be the first to establish these common standards, it will be possible to have common global standards for all our communities. And then we can put them into our national legislation. I think that is the central turning point, because if we don't have these standards, the building community, for example, could always say, they are not safe, you can't have residents inside. And so there will be always in the gray area. But if we have standards, you can have a zoning code in your municipality, specific land where you can building your communities. So this is one of the most important thing. And the other thing is that it will be possible to consider them a safe dwelling unit for full-time living, as I said, for a permanent living. But on the other side, there is the building sector that said, okay, you avoid costs, but we have to struggle because there will be a big community of traditional builders that said, you can enter into my market. So this is another important problem. We are trying also using 3D stamps and using recycled material, but they said with the company close to here, close to Ravenna, but they said us because we use rice, the garbage of rice, to do this, and they said it's garbage, it's not a building material. So it is too much in the future, I think so. But in reality, now the company has started to sell this kind of houses in 3D houses in Dubai and other countries. So where there
It's
are
coming.
different.
It's coming. Yeah, they'll be coming.
Yeah, because
innovation.
In 3 days you have your 3D tiny house.
Yeah,
potentially.
print it out. Yeah. No, I got you.
Yeah. So this is my experience that I have submitted my request and I have received a positive response. So we have to find now the way, not for a unique specimen, but for more than one.
Yeah. So you got your unique approval, but that's only unique to your situation. You need it more global.
Yeah, I think that if there would be global standards, it should be advisable to submit this adequate standards to the rapporteur of the adequate housing of the United Nations that is located in the US. He's a lawyer of the University, because with all the community of tiny houser, because through the UN Habitat Agency, it could propose international norms to the entire global community that could be binding for, not binding the recommendation, but the resource and also the norms, the legal framework could be shared to all the member states of the United Nations. So I think if in the future we'll have these standards, we can say the adequate standards are ours.
Yeah. Yeah, they wherever they come from, whether it's ASTM or wherever they come from, adequate standards for life safety and fire safety and security and things like that. Yeah, no, I got it.
Yeah, I think it's important because we are a global network, so the United Nations are global, and the Special Rapporteur of Adequate Housing is the only one that could say these standards are adequate.
Good.
So this is the hint that I think about in my nights when I think about, but I think it is sensitive because it could be a solution for their problem, as it is a rapporteur that should tackle this kind of problem of adequate housing. So we can find a solution for him in some way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
it.
Anything else that we need to address here? Or can we kind of open it for any questions and get Leanne to kind of wrap things up for us? Do you have anything else that you wanted to present? Yes, no? Okay. All right. Leanne, do you want to take it from there?
I surely will. First of all, does anybody have any questions for Karen coming to us from Italy this evening? I just want to say thank you so much. That was a great deal of information, and we appreciate you joining us tonight and sharing all that you're doing for the tiny house movement over there. And we at NOAA believe in the freedom to live and to live safely. So you're welcome to follow our Facebook page. I do share quite a lot of articles about, we have different cities here in the US that are building the tiny house villages specifically for the homeless or homeless veterans or veterans. We have a church that just built a phenomenal community, just 6 houses, but we jumped through hoops for the city of St. Paul to get these people into their homes. And they are now, I just read the other day, they are now safely living in their tiny houses that are NOAA certified. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us and sharing that. We wish you all the best. Yeah, we wish you all the best. If there's anything we can do over here, let us know. But I just want to know where are you in Italy?
Okay, absolutely. I really thank you for this support because it's very important to share information all together, especially when we have to struggle with local norms. And so my dream is to give the opportunity to homeless of my city to have their own home. So it's my dream. Yeah. So I completely agree with you because it's one of the reason why I'm trying to do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, if there's anything we can do, let us know.
Really, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I know it's late over there.
Yes, thank you,
Anybody have
Karen.
any-
That was great.
Really,
All right,
really
well, I guess that's it. Nobody has any questions. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll be here with Scott Banta. If you've ever wondered everything that's involved in building a tiny house community, you're welcome to join us. Hope you can, and we will see you tomorrow night. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
All right, bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye-bye.